doors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION. World is one.
Vielleicht nur als 5%.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One, and this is World DNA with me, Dr. Kamal. Let's begin with the headlines. The Israeli military says it has launched broad-scale strikes on targets in Tehran after detecting Iranian missile fire towards Tel Aviv. Explosions reported in western Tehran and in Tel Aviv. Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted a ballistic missile fired at Prince Sultan Air Base southeast of capital Riyadh, which houses U.S. military personnel, as Iran pressed attacks across the Gulf. U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth says Washington is not concerned about reports that Russia is providing intelligence to Iran on U.S. troop positions and movements. In an interview with CBS, says U.S. is tracking everything.
Their army is gone. They're just about, look, their navy is gone. Their communications are gone. Their leaders are gone.
Donald Trump says U.S. military campaign against Iran is going very well. Speaking at the White House, he claims Iran's army, navy, communications, and leadership have been largely destroyed. Pakistani man Asif Raza Merchant found guilty of plotting to assassinate Donald Trump or other U.S. officials. Prosecutors say plot linked to Iran intended to avenge 2020 killing of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani. U.S. President Donald Trump holds a meeting with the CEOs of major U.S. defense manufacturing firms and says that they have agreed to quadruple production of what he called exquisite class weaponry. Anthropic chief executive Dario Amodei says the company has no choice but to challenge in court Pentagon's formal designation of the artificial intelligence firm as a risk to U.S. national security. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that Washington may lift sanctions on more Russian oil to ease what he called the temporary gap of oil around the world. Oil prices surged on Friday as West Asia tensions rattled global supply. U.S. crude jumped 12% to $90.9 a barrel, while Brent crude rose 8.5% to $92.69 for the week. U.S. crude soared more than 35%, the biggest gain on record. And as the U.S.-Israel war with Iran enters day 8, let's take a quick recap of some of the latest developments that have been coming in from West Asia. Explosions have lit up the skies over western Tehran early Saturday as Israeli fighter jets carried out heavy strikes on Iranian capital. Iranian state media reported blasts in the city's western districts. Israel confirmed it had launched a broad-scale offensive on government sites in Tehran. Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted a ballistic missile fired at an airbase southeast of the capital, Riyadh, as Iran pressed attacks across the Gulf. The Saudi Defense Ministry posted on X that a ballistic missile launched towards Prince Sultan Air Base was intercepted and destroyed. And this is the second big Iranian strike on Saudi Arabia in the last 10 hours. Earlier, Saudi Arabia's Defense Ministry said it intercepted and destroyed a cruise missile near the central Al-Kharj area. U.S. President Donald Trump declared that the U.S. military campaign against Iran is progressing very well, insisting that only Tehran's unconditional surrender would end the escalating conflict. Speaking at the White House, Trump claimed Iran's army, navy, communications, and leadership have been largely destroyed. His remarks came as global oil prices surged amid fears of supply disruptions linked to the intensifying West Asia war. A U.S. Air Force C-5 Galaxy military transporter landed at RAF Fairford in southwest England as the West Asia conflict escalates. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer authorized American use of 2 British bases for what he described as a specific and limited defensive purpose after initially rejecting involvement in the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. Houthi supporters stage a rally in Sana'a in the Yemen, voicing solidarity with Iran and Lebanon as regional tensions rise. In a televised speech, the Iran-backed Houthi leader warned that his group was prepared to launch strikes at any moment, signaling a potential escalation in the conflict. All right, to discuss more, joining us from Australia, we have journalist and author Lynn O'Donnell. Thank you so much for taking out your time and joining us on the broadcast. Now, you have covered the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and also drove Taliban from power, and the 2003 war in Iraq that had ended Saddam Hussein's rule. How are you analyzing this current conflict?
Well, hi, and thanks for having me. If we look at it in the historical context, both Iraq and Afghanistan wars, invasions, if you like, by the United States were preceded by huge and rapid buildup of ground forces that then invaded. We don't have that situation in Iran. It's mostly air, missiles and cyber attacks. And also Afghanistan and Iraq were 2 very weak governments at the time and were easily toppled. The strategy was different. In Afghanistan, it was to go in and dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power and then rebuild the nation. Iraq also get rid of Saddam, also a nation-building exercise. And nation-building has been specifically taken off the table, at least verbally, by the United States administration. They seem just to want to remove the leadership of the government of Iran, weaken, destabilise the military, the IRGC, and then, as they keep saying, as President Trump keeps saying, over to the people to complete regime change if that's what they want. So very different from the 2 earlier regional wars that we've seen this century.
But also we've kept on hearing from Trump of, he wants a say in who now becomes the next leader. Where does that stand, and how easy or hard is it for the U.S. to interfere and have a U.S. backed or maybe a say in who leads Iran?
It's very difficult to know. There doesn't seem to be any real forward planning by the United States administration vis-a-vis what comes after the so-called decapitation or removal of the Iranian leadership. Let's get rid of the mullahs, and what comes next, nobody knows. So I think it's more rhetoric, especially what we're hearing from Donald Trump and from his Secretary of Defence /War, Pete Hegseth. There seems to be more bluster and rhetoric than forward planning at this stage. So I think it's impossible to know. He's said that Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who is being rumoured to take over once, or at least be announced as the next leader once Khamenei's funeral is done. He's called him a lightweight. Does he know? It's a very, very complex governmental system that is decentralised and has its own survival built in. So just changing the name at the top isn't going to be enough. And you know, especially when we're looking at an possibly elongated conflict here.
Right. And also now we have reports where Saudi Arabia has reportedly intensified direct communications with Iran. And according to Bloomberg, that is, Riyadh is opening urgent channels with Tehran. That is an attempt to prevent the conflict from spiraling. How positive do you think this move is, considering that they are still under attack as we talk?
I think it's a very positive move, to be honest with you. It signals that Riyadh is wanting to de-escalate. They're reaching out to Tehran and wanting to open talks, obviously for their own survival. But we're also looking at missile attacks on the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil supply is transported, and it's very vulnerable. Also, desalination plants in the region. Iran could knock those out with missile strikes, and you'd have 10 million people without water within a couple of days. Extreme panic would ensue. The Saudis are being pragmatic. They want to talk to de-escalate, keep the money flowing as the oil flows through to their customers, and stop the war. Nothing wrong with that.
And of course, since you've covered war in West Asia, how would you assess Iran's capabilities in this particular war, considering the fact that Israel have been claiming to have destroyed most of Iran's air defenses and majority of its missile launchers, and we've heard the same from Trump? Well, we heard that Iran's nuclear program had been totally obliterated in June last year in a 12-day war that both countries together acquitted against Iran. And now suddenly they're an imminent threat. We've got to go against the nuclear installations again. It's either total obliteration or it's not. So we're hearing a lot of rhetoric. We also can, I think, pretty much take it as written at this stage that Israel jumped the gun. America and Iran were still in negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, which it insists is for peaceful purposes, and during which it had acquiesced already to all the American demands. Now, Israel jumped the gun, giving plausible deniability if there was a failure involved in that to the Trump administration. He liked what he saw. He followed through himself, and now he's taking the kudos for a successful campaign. The Iranians have large stockpiles of missiles. They can keep going for some time yet. As we now, to me that it makes sense that he's requesting them to ramp up production to replenish the missiles and other weaponry that the Americans are using in the Gulf. But it also signals to the Iranians a desire and an ability to keep going if you don't do what we say. So, you know, there's a lot of argy-bargy and rhetoric on both sides, but I think that if both sides decide that they can continue with this, then the war will last some time yet, perhaps some weeks, if not months. And that being said, we've heard President Donald Trump, he held a meeting with U.S. Defense companies, and he has asked for them to ramp up production. Of course, is this indicating, of course, we heard Karen Levitt say it's 4 to 6, but do you think that we're going to be looking at an extended war situation as of now? From the U.S. side?
Well, when presidents ask defence companies to ramp up production, as I've just said, it's usually about replenishing stockpiles. So especially precision missiles, air defence interceptors, drones, which are consumed very quickly in modern conflicts. And so the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, for instance, have already shown how fast inventories can be drawn down. So it signals from Donald Trump to the Iranians a message of deterrence. By increasing production, the US is saying we are prepared to go on for as long as it takes to reach our objectives. We just don't yet know what those objectives might be.
Yeah. Also, that's, of course, another question of what the objective is, because we've been hearing U.S. say it was the missile sites, and it was the nuclear sites, and it was the regime change. There doesn't seem to be one particular goal what they have or the objective, and it's the same for what could it mean for Israel? Is there any goal that Israel's looking for?
I think that the Israeli aim is the complete decapitation of the Iranian leadership and the disabling of the IRGC, the military. Israel has felt threatened for a very long time by Iran, and rightly so, because it is part of Iran's constitution that Israel should not exist. So when you have a powerful force like Iran, with multiple proxies that are all attuned to the destruction of the Israeli state, naturally that is going to be Netanyahu's end goal, is to dismantle and remove the threat that Israel is facing.
Right. And talking of the forces of Iran, we talk about Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah has been deployed, and they have now deployed their elite Radwan forces. This is according to some reports coming in. And they've, of course, they're lined up in the southern Lebanon front to confront these advancing Israeli troops. How do you look at this development coming in? Do you think the other Iran-backed groups will be making a move? Because we haven't seen any from Houthis yet.
Well, never say never with the Houthis, but I think what we're seeing with the elite Hezbollah forces, which is what the Radwan force is, building up along the border, I think is an indication that they expect possible on-the-ground combat with Israeli forces. I don't think that can be counted out, not just rocket exchanges. So Radwan fighters are typically reserved for high-intensity fighting, so their deployment suggests that Hezbollah is preparing for close combat with Israeli troops rather than limited harassment attacks. So I think we should keep an eye on that situation. And back to the Houthis, they're most likely to act because they already have experience striking shipping, as we've seen over the past couple of years since the October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel. And they also have used missiles and drones against Israeli territory. So I think that the Houthis haven't yet been deployed. They're being kept in reserve, and Hezbollah is preparing.
And would that be a deliberate move from Iran? Because consider the fact that now we don't have communications, and it's really difficult to know what's going on in Iran. And what we knew further was that IRGC does not have one particular leader. They have different leaders in different places, and that's how they're operating as of now, a whole war zone. And without the communications, no one can actually know what exactly is going on. So is this a deliberate act of the Houthis not acting as of now?
Well, that's difficult to know. Iran may be holding them in reserve. I mean, they're definitely an Iranian proxy, as is Hamas and Hezbollah. So, they will more likely than not be deployed. And you're right to say that the Iranian structure is decentralized. And this has been a very purposeful strategy on the part of the Iranian authorities, and it's all about regime survival. They've been preparing to survive, and that's what this is about.
Right, and also we have another angle. Reports are emerging that the Kremlin has now been tactically supporting Iran in a war machine with the precise intelligence to. How do you assess this Russian involvement at a time where Russia is again in a battle with Ukraine on the other side?
Well, I think that anything that happens to take attention away from Russian action in Ukraine would be welcomed by the Kremlin. They have been close with the Iranian regime for some time, and so providing them with intelligence support, satellite imaging, or targeting data would be a relatively low-risk way of raising the cost to America and its allies in another theatre. So, quite likely, and really from the Russian perspective, a useful thing to do.
And would you think that other allies, such as China, could be soon involved, or we just see, because we've seen condemnation from China yet, but we haven't seen any kind of involvement as we see from Russia?
Well, the Chinese will be much more subtle, I think, than Russia. They always are, but they are close to Iran. They have a lot of involvement and influence with the Iranian leadership. So don't count them out, but don't expect any public statements either.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lynn O'Donnell. That was author and journalist Lynn O'Donnell joining us from Australia. Appreciate your coming and giving your perspective on this.
Thank you very much.
And well, a Pakistani man accused of plotting with the Iranian government to murder public officials, including President Trump, has been convicted of a plan that involved hiring hitmen, stealing documents, and assassinating senior American officials. And the man named Asif Raza Merchant was found guilty of attempted terrorism, transcending national boundaries, and murder for hire after a jury in federal district court in Brooklyn deliberated for less than 2 hours. He was arrested on July 12, 2024, as he prepared to leave the U.S. Now, during his trial, Merchant claimed he was coerced into the plot to protect his family in Tehran from the Revolutionary Guards. He testified he was never ordered to kill a specific person, but noted his Iranian contact mentioned 3 possible targets: President Donald Trump, former President Joe Biden, and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. Now, prosecutors say that the plot was allegedly in retaliation to the American military killing of Revolutionary Guards commander Qasem Soleimani. Now, Soleimani, the head of Iran's foreign military operations, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad in January 2020. Iranian officials have repeatedly vowed to avenge his killing. Merchant's trial comes amid U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran that killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. U.S. officials say Merchant had close ties to Iran, calling the alleged plot straight out of the Iranian regime's playbook. Washington says the strikes aim to curb Iran's nuclear and missile threats, while Trump has demanded unconditional surrender. And global markets took a beating, and oil prices surged over $90 per barrel as the Iran war raged on. However, Israel's markets defied the broader global gloom. Now, Israel's stocks and currency rallied in the week that was more prominent for the Iran war. And that comes even as markets elsewhere retreated amid soaring energy prices and mounting concern about a prolonged conflict in West Asia. The Tel Aviv 35 index was the second best performer among major stock gauges, closing the week up more than 7% in dollar terms. Energy company Delek Group jumped 22%. Defense firms Elbit Systems surged 16%. The shekel appreciated 1.4% against the greenback, marking the currency's strongest advance in 2 months. The Israeli shekel also outperformed most among major currencies against the dollar. Rafi Gozlan, chief economist at IBI Investment House, has said some investors looked beyond the short-term uncertainty on bets the U.S. and Israel will win the war and mitigate long-term risks. Yadin Antebi, the CEO of Bank Hapolim, told Bloomberg after this war, the country will have improved its strategic geopolitical position as its best threat is weakened or possibly removed. And with that, we'll be calling wrap to World DNA. News and updates will follow on the other side. We'll be continuing with our coverage of the situation in West Asia on the other side of this very short break. Keep watching WION World is One.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Beyond the noise and rhetoric, no election, no ballot issue too small. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. More than just headlines. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION. World is One.
Get the latest updates.
Destroy their
Breaking
missiles
news.
and raise their
Credible, clear, continuous. Experts across aisles. Diverse voices, one platform. WION World is One.
problem with NATO is that
In an ever-changing, fast-paced world, identifying the pulse of global happenings is important. Because it is the pulse that truly measures the real nature of world events. It monitors the shifting geopolitical landscapes and anticipates what lies ahead. At WION World Pulse 2026, we tap into the heartbeat of events that matter to you and to the world. 7 pulsating themes, 100 plus thought leaders, one dynamic platform, WION World Pulse. The rhythm of the new world order.
In West Asia, every move shifts the world's balance. Wars, ceasefires, alliances, power never stands still. From Tehran to Tel Aviv, from Damascus to Doha, the West Asia Post cuts through the chaos to reveal the region that shapes the world. Because what happens in West Asia never stays in West Asia. This is the West Asia Post, the region's story, the world's impact.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening. As we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is One. In-depth coverage of global issues broken down into facts, figures and simple words. Backed with analysis from field experts who truly matter, because we believe in decoding the real picture for you.
So you get a much wider and deeper understanding of stories from around the world. A 360-degree analysis. An award-winning documentary series, week after week creating the maximum impact. Watch WION Wide Angle at these times on WION. World is One.
Vielleicht nur als